Sergeant Thomas Reed adjusted his grip on Cota's leash, the German shepherd standing tall and alert beside him. The doors to the Fairfield County Courthouse swung open, ushering in a wave of murmurs and curious glances from the gathered crowd. But Thomas didn't falter. Guided by Cota's steady presence, he walked confidently down the center aisle, his sharp posture a testament to his years of service. Yet, for all his poise, the whispers were unavoidable. Most eyes were on Thomas, the blind officer who had earned accolades for his bravery. Others were fixed on Cota, whose every movement exuded discipline and sharp intelligence. But the true bond between them, a partnership forged through countless missions, was invisible to those who only saw the surface. Judge Allen Hensley, a man known for his biting sarcasm, looked up from his bench with a smirk. "Well, this is new," he quipped, leaning forward. "Let me guess, the dog not only finds the evidence but also testifies for you, Sergeant?" His laugh echoed through the room, drawing nervous chuckles from the audience. Thomas remained composed, though his hand tightened ever so slightly on Cota's leash. Cota responded with a single, commanding bark that reverberated through the courtroom, silencing the judge's mirth and the murmurs it had inspired. "Your Honor," Thomas began, his voice steady and unyielding, "Cota and I don't rely on jokes to do our job. Last week, we rescued a 7-year-old child during an ambush. If you'd like, I can explain how we did it instead of debating my credibility." The tension in the room shifted. Prosecutor Sarah Blake stood quickly, her tone sharp yet respectful. "Sergeant Reed, please share the events of that night. I believe everyone here could learn from your courage." As Thomas recounted the rescue, every detail painted a vivid picture. Cota's unwavering focus in the chaos, Thomas's acute reliance on his partner's signals, and the life they saved, each moment spoke volumes about their unshakable trust. The courtroom fell silent, absorbed by the gravity of their story. Even Judge Hensley appeared momentarily moved, though his demeanor quickly reverted. "A nice tale," he said dryly, leaning back in his chair. "But tell me this. How does a blind man shoot a criminal without missing? Or did your dog handle that part too?" Thomas's jaw tightened, but he smiled faintly, tilting his head toward the judge. "Courage, Your Honor, doesn't require sight. It only takes heart." Cota barked again, the sound resolute, commanding a silence that the judge couldn't dismiss. As the proceedings adjourned, Thomas walked out of the courtroom with Cota by his side, the murmurs now replaced by a quiet respect. The battle for acknowledgement wasn't over, he knew that. But with Cota guiding him, Thomas felt ready for whatever came next. The courthouse steps stretched before Thomas like a silent challenge. As he descended, Cota's steady movements guided him through the biting winter air, each step an unspoken testament to their bond. The low murmurs of those who had witnessed the courtroom exchange seemed to follow him, a mix of doubt and reluctant admiration. Despite his calm demeanor, the sting of Judge Hensley's words clung to Thomas like the cold air biting at his skin. Cota, ever attuned to his partner, nudged Thomas's leg gently. The German shepherd's alert eyes scanned their surroundings, but his focus remained on Thomas. The officer reached down, brushing his fingers through Cota's thick fur. "They don't get it, do they, buddy?" he muttered, his voice a mixture of frustration and quiet resolve. Cota let out a low, reassuring whine, as if to say, "We've got this." Just as they reached the bottom of the steps, a familiar voice broke through the noise. "Sergeant Reed, wait!" Prosecutor Sarah Blake's hurried footsteps echoed behind him, her tone laced with urgency. Thomas paused, turning slightly toward her. Cota shifted instinctively, positioning himself protectively at Thomas's side. "I hope you're not here to tell me Hensley suddenly respects me," Thomas said dryly, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Sarah gave a short laugh, though her expression remained serious. "Not quite, but I wanted to say you handled yourself well in there. It's not easy going head-to-head with someone like him. You didn't flinch." Thomas nodded, his grip tightening on Kota's leash. "Thanks, but we both know he's not done. Hensley's playing a long game. He wants to prove I'm not fit for the field, and he'll push until he does." Sarah sighed, her breath visible in the frigid air. "You're right. He's looking for any excuse to undermine you. But for what it's worth, I've seen what you and Kota are capable of. You're the best team out there, and he's a fool if he can't see that." "Appreciate it?" Thomas replied, his voice steady despite the tension simmering beneath. "But proving people like him wrong is what we do. Always have, always will." Sarah studied him for a moment, her gaze softening. "Just watch your back. Hensley's not above making things personal." As she turned to leave, Thomas stood for a moment, Kota pressed against his side like a living shield. The prosecutor's warning echoed in his mind, but he pushed it aside. Hensley wasn't the first doubter he'd faced, and he wouldn't be the last. Back at their apartment, the day's weight seemed to dissipate slightly in the familiar quiet. Thomas sank into the couch, Kota settling at his feet with a contented sigh. Running a hand over the dog's head, Thomas murmured, "We've faced worse, haven't we, buddy?" Kota's tail thumped softly in agreement, his eyes closing as he relaxed. But the peace was short-lived. Thomas's phone buzzed on the table, the sharp sound cutting through the stillness. Answering it, he recognized Captain Harris's voice immediately. "Reed, we've got an update on the Santiago case. New intel just came in. They've pinpointed the stash location, but it's heavily guarded. They want you and Kota to lead the raid tomorrow night." Without hesitation, Thomas replied, "We're in." As he hung up, Thomas looked down at Kota, who was already watching him intently. "Looks like we've got work to do," he said, a faint smile breaking through his exhaustion. Kota let out a low growl of anticipation, his body tense and ready. The challenge ahead was daunting, but Thomas knew one thing for certain. Together, he and Kota were unstoppable. The moon hung high in the cold night sky as Thomas and Kota arrived at the staging area near the abandoned warehouse. The air was thick with anticipation, the faint hum of adrenaline coursing through the team as they prepared for the raid. The Santiago Syndicate's remaining operation lay just beyond the cracked walls and rusting steel, a labyrinth of danger hidden within the shadows. Thomas stood at the center of the briefing circle, Kota sitting alert at his side. Captain Harris addressed the team with a firm, authoritative tone, outlining the strategy. "Reed and Kota will take point. Their job is to clear the initial perimeter and locate the primary entry route. The rest of us will follow their lead and secure the main evidence room." His gaze shifted to Thomas. "You and Kota know the risks better than anyone. You ready for this?" Thomas gave a single nod, his hand resting on Kota's head. "We're ready." The SWAT team moved in silence, their breaths visible in the crisp winter air. The sound of boots crunching against gravel and the faint clatter of gear were the only noises as they approached the warehouse. The hulking structure loomed ahead, its jagged edges silhouetted against the pale moonlight. Kota moved with fluid precision, his nose low to the ground and his ears flicking at every faint noise. Thomas held the leash loosely, trusting his partner to guide them through the maze of obstacles ahead. Suddenly, Kota froze, his body tense as he let out a low growl. Thomas immediately signaled for the team to stop, his senses sharpening as he crouched beside the German shepherd. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, running his hand over Kota's thick fur. Kota's gaze locked onto a stack of crates to their right, his posture alert. The dog let out a single, quiet bark, a signal they had practiced countless times. Thomas relayed the message into his radio. "We've got movement, 2, maybe 3 suspects just ahead." The team adjusted their formation, spreading out with weapons at the ready. Thomas tightened his grip on Kota's leash, his heart pounding as they moved forward. Kota led them with unerring accuracy, guiding the group around a cluster of machinery and toward the edge of the warehouse. Suddenly, a shout erupted from the darkness, followed by the unmistakable sound of a weapon being cocked. "Stop where you are!" a voice barked, rough and laced with panic. The SWAT team froze, their weapons trained on the source of the noise. Thomas felt Kota press against his leg, the dog's body coiled like a spring. "Hold your ground," Thomas said into the radio, his voice low but steady. He could hear the faint shuffle of footsteps as the suspects moved closer, their positions now revealed. Thomas gave a single command. "Kota, on me." The German shepherd sprang into action, moving swiftly and silently around the perimeter of the crates. Within seconds, chaos erupted. Shouts rang out as Kota lunged at one of the suspects, knocking the weapon from his hands. The man hit the ground hard, struggling against Kota's unrelenting grip. Thomas moved in quickly, his focus razor-sharp as he secured the suspect with zip ties. "Good boy, Kota," he murmured, his hand brushing over the dog's head before turning his attention back to the scene. The SWAT team moved like a well-oiled machine, taking down the remaining suspects with precision. As the dust began to settle, Thomas heard Captain Harris's voice crackle through his radio. "Reed, we've got confirmation of a secondary room. It's heavily barricaded. We think that's where the evidence is. Can you and Kota handle it?" Thomas's jaw tightened as he glanced at the barricaded area. "We're on it," he replied, his voice filled with quiet determination. Kota stood by his side, his tail wagging slightly as if sensing the challenge ahead. Thomas knelt beside him, running a hand over his partner's head. "Ready, buddy. Let's show them what we can do." With that, they moved forward, the tension thick in the air as they approached the barricaded room. Together, they were an unstoppable force, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The heavy metal door loomed ahead, its battered surface reflecting the faint glow of the team's flashlights. Thomas could feel the cold radiating from the barricade, as if the very air around it carried the weight of the danger beyond. Kota was already at work, his nose pressed to the ground as he sniffed along the edges, searching for any weaknesses. Behind them, the SWAT team waited in tense silence, weapons drawn and ready. Captain Harris's voice came through the radio, steady but firm. "Reed, what's the situation?" Thomas knelt beside Kota, running his hand along the frame of the door. "There's a small gap near the bottom," he replied. "Kota's picking up something. Could be movement on the other side." Kota let out a low growl, his tail stiff as his body tensed. It was a signal Thomas knew well. There were people inside, and they were armed. He placed a hand on Kota's back, feeling the strength and readiness coursing through his partner. "Good boy," he murmured. "We've got this." Standing, Thomas turned to the team. "We'll breach and assess. Kota will lead the way to flush them out. Be ready for anything." Harris's voice crackled through the radio again. "Understood. On your go." Thomas crouched back down beside Kota, whispering the command that unleashed the German shepherd's relentless focus. "Kota, search." Kota moved with the precision of a predator, his body low, and his movement silent as he slipped through the gap in the barricade. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, chaos erupted. shouts, and the sharp clatter of metal filled the air as Kota darted into the room, his bark a warning that sent the suspects scrambling. The SWAT team moved in behind him, their weapons trained on the figures inside. Thomas followed, his senses attuned to every sound, every movement. "Hands in the air!" Harris shouted, his voice cutting through the commotion. "Nobody move." But one of the suspects ignored the command, lunging toward a stack of crates in a desperate attempt to escape. Kota was on him in an instant, his powerful jaws clamping onto the man's arm and dragging him to the ground. The suspect cried out, dropping the weapon he had been reaching for. "Hold, Kota," Thomas commanded, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. Kota froze, his body tense but his grip firm, waiting for further instructions. Thomas moved in swiftly, securing the suspect and retrieving the weapon. Around them, the SWAT team worked methodically, subduing the remaining suspects and securing the area. The room was soon filled with the sounds of zipping ties and muffled protests as the operation came to a close. "Room's clear," Harris announced, his tone filled with relief. "Good work, everyone." Thomas knelt beside Kota, running a hand through the dog's fur. "You did good, buddy," he said softly. Kota's tail wagged slightly, his body relaxing now that the danger had passed. As the team began to catalog the evidence, a cache of weapons, stacks of cash, and ledgers filled with incriminating details, Thomas felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was the kind of work that defined their partnership, the kind of work that proved they were unstoppable. But as they prepared to leave the warehouse, Thomas couldn't shake the weight of Judge Hensley's challenge. This raid had been a victory, but he knew it wouldn't be enough to silence the judge's doubts. That battle was still ahead, and it would take more than one successful mission to win. As the team stepped out into the cold night air, Thomas glanced down at Kota. The German shepherd looked up at him, his eyes filled with unwavering trust. "One step at a time, huh, buddy?" Thomas murmured. Kota let out a soft bark, his tail wagging as they walked toward the waiting vehicles. Together, they had faced the chaos and come out stronger, and together they would face whatever came next. The next morning, the courtroom was buzzing with a new kind of energy. News of the raid had spread quickly, and everyone, from spectators to court staff, seemed eager to see how Judge Hensley would react. Thomas entered the room with Kota at his side, his posture as steady as ever. Kota trotted confidently, his tail swaying slightly, a quiet symbol of their triumph. Judge Hensley sat at the bench, his usual stern expression firmly in place. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the gavel, a small yet deliberate act that hinted at his thoughts. As Thomas approached the stand, the room fell silent, the weight of anticipation thick in the air. "Sergeant Reed," Hensley began, his voice measured. "I've been briefed on last night's operation. Quite the eventful evening, wasn't it?" Thomas nodded, his grip on Kota's leash firm. "Yes, Your Honor. It was a critical mission, and I'm proud to say it was successful." Hensley leaned back in his chair, his sharp gaze fixed on Thomas. "So, tell me, Sergeant, how does a blind man navigate the chaos of a high-stakes raid with such precision?" Thomas didn't flinch. "With training, Your Honor, and with a partner I trust more than anyone in the world." He glanced down at Kota, who sat at attention, his eyes locked on the judge. "Kota and I have spent years honing our skills. He's my eyes in the field, but more than that, he's my partner. Together, we've faced challenges that would test anyone, sighted or not." The judge raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "And last night? Was it one of those challenges?" Thomas nodded. "It was. The suspects were heavily armed, and the environment was unpredictable. But Kota did what he's trained to do. He identified threats, guided me through the chaos, and ensured that everyone on the team came out safe. He's not just a dog, Your Honor. He's a hero." The room was silent, every word hanging in the air like a delicate thread. Even Hensley seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Then, to everyone's surprise, he leaned forward, his tone uncharacteristically soft. "Sergeant Reed," he said, his voice carrying a hint of respect, "it's clear that you and Kota share a bond that goes beyond the ordinary. I'll admit, I've had my doubts about your abilities, but after hearing what you accomplished last night, I'm beginning to see things differently." Thomas's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Gratitude, perhaps, or quiet vindication. "Thank you, Your Honor." Hensley cleared his throat, his usual sternness returning. "That said, the court still expects every officer, cited or not, to meet the highest standards of performance. But I'll be watching closely, Sergeant. Consider this your opportunity to prove that those standards aren't just met, they're exceeded." Thomas nodded, his resolve unshaken. "Understood, Your Honor." As the gavel struck, signaling the end of the session, Thomas turned to leave. Kota walked beside him, his tail wagging slightly, as if he too understood the significance of the moment. Outside the courthouse, Sarah Blake was waiting, her expression a mix of relief and admiration. "You did it," she said, falling into step beside him. "I think you might have just cracked that icy shell of his." Thomas chuckled softly. "Maybe, but this isn't the end. Hensley's still watching, and I've got more to prove." Sarah glanced at Kota, who was looking up at Thomas with unshakable loyalty. "If last night was any indication, I don't think you'll have any trouble proving it." Thomas stopped, kneeling to scratch behind Kota's ears. "What do you think, buddy? Are we up for the challenge?" Kota barked once, a sharp, confident sound that echoed in the crisp winter air. Thomas smiled, rising to his feet. "Yeah, I think so too." As they walked away, the sun breaking through the clouds above, there was a sense of quiet triumph in their steps. They had faced the doubts, the challenges, and the chaos together. And together, they would continue to prove that courage and loyalty were more powerful than any obstacle. Did this story of trust, determination, and an unbreakable bond inspire you? Show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more heartwarming and heroic tales like this one. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Together, we can share stories that remind us of the extraordinary connections between humans and animals.